Hey guys, welcome to my first drive video on BMW's X5 xDrive 50e. This model was launched at the back end of 2023, and since then I've been asked so many times to feature it on the channel. So I do apologise that it's taken me over 6 months to do that, and I really hope that you enjoy this video. The 50e is a plug-in hybrid version of the ever popular and recently facelifted X5. It replaces the pre-facelift X5 45e. I featured that particular model on the channel about 4 years ago. It was a good car and a good package, but it definitely was compromised. So I'm hoping this very latest version has ironed out some of that car's issues. A base price of a 50e with the M Sport trim on it's going to set you back £82,000 here in the UK. Except this particular Manhattan green press car has about 20 grand's worth of options on it, meaning it tips the scales at just over £100,000. I love the styling on the G Series X5, both pre-facelift and this very latest facelifted model. The front end is spot on. It's good looking and it's aggressive, especially in this M Sport trim. When we get along the side of the car, well, I love these 21-inch wheels, which are standard on this particular model. Definitely better looking than some of the other modern wheels we're seeing today that are all very aero and, in my opinion, quite ugly as a result. When we get around the back of the car, well, there haven't been massive changes. We've got new rear light clusters, we've got a new rear diffuser, but overall, as a package, especially in this gorgeous Manhattan green paint that we've already talked about, I think it just looks spot on. It's classy, it's sporty, but it's not over the top. Before we open the bonnet and talk about this car's running gear, I wanted to show you in the boot. And unfortunately, this is the first area that BMW have had to compromise with the X5 in order to make it a hybrid. You see, a regular X5, like that wonderful X5 30D I had recently, well, that has a 650 litre boot, whereas this 50e hybrid version has a 500 litre boot. That's 150 litres smaller, or exactly the same size boot as a 3 Series Touring. So bear that in mind. And also underneath the boot, there's very little storage in here, I'm sure, compared to, let's call it a combustion only X5. So there are some compromises straight away. And that's because, well, there's batteries in here somewhere taking up a lot of space, and so they've had to lift the boot floor. Under this bonnet we'll find a detuned version of BMW's B58, which is a 3 litre inline 6 turbocharged engine, and that's mated to an electric motor that is located in the 8-speed automatic gearbox. Combined, they produce a total maximum output of 483 horsepower and 700 newton meters of torque. That's almost 100 horsepower more than the 45e used to produce. Thankfully, this has a decent sized battery for a plug-in hybrid at 25.7 kilowatt hours. BMW claim that this has an electric only range of just over 60 miles. In the week that I've had this car, I've found that figure to be closer to 50 miles, but that's still decent and a lot better than the 45e. I seem to remember when I had that car, I struggled to get more than about 25 miles out of it, so almost twice the range. BMW claim this would do the 0 to 62 sprint in just 4.8 seconds, which is massively impressive for such a big car that weighs 2.5 tons. We're going to put that to test shortly. Jumping inside and into one of the most wonderful cabins I've had the pleasure of sitting in. It really is a perfect blend and mix of comfort, ergonomics, luxury, tech. In fact, as we talked about on the outside, this particular press car has lots of options. We'll run through a few now. Extended black merino leather, electronic tow bar that pops out and in, Sky Lounge pan roof, lovely option to have, especially if you're running this as a family car and you're going to have regular passengers in the back, because it brings in some light, and especially if you're running black leather, because that doesn't help. Except this particular pan roof is the Sky Lounge version at almost £3,000. It has thousands of LEDs in it, and they will change colour depending on what colour you have with the rest of the ambient lighting in the cabin. I used to have one in my 7 Series chauffeuring car, and my clients absolutely loved it at night. This also has the Tech Plus pack, the Comfort Plus pack, and the M Sport Pro pack. Unfortunately, in that Comfort Plus pack, you get the comfort seats. I say unfortunately, they're brilliant seats, but the standard fit sport seats are so much better, so much more adjustable, more comfortable, more supportive. So if you can avoid getting these comfort seats, I genuinely would. They also give you a slightly better driving position because you tend to sit a little bit lower. And although we have BMW's curved display and therefore climate control as part of that, there are still plenty of old school buttons and iDrive controllers to play with. And in fact, while we're talking about that, we have a couple of extra buttons down here, the hybrid button, the electric button, and a battery hold button. We also have this toggle here that controls the height of the X5 because this is on air suspension. And in fact, the 50e M Sport comes standard with air suspension, which is a big plus in my books. You might remember me going on and on about that wonderful suspension in that recent X5 30D. I believe it as an option on that car. Well, on this one, it comes with it. And that means that we have 80 millimeters of adjustable suspension. So we start off in 0, we can go right up to plus 40 mil if we're taking it off-road, for example. It will go right down to minus 20 if we put it into sports mode and therefore lower the center of gravity, and it will go a further 20 down, so minus 40 when you're stationary and let's say loading the boot. In fact, there's a button in the boot that you can press and it will lower the car whether you're in it or not. And that's really handy for practicality. It's really handy for loading and unloading. Just having that air suspension is a wonderful thing, especially living here in the UK where our roads are not the best. First thing to do is test out this car's claimed acceleration figures. BMW say it will do the 0 to 62 sprint in just 4.8 seconds. Conditions outside, although it has just been raining, are close to perfect, and we have BMW's xDrive system and massively wide rubber, so I'm not concerned about that at all. We're in sport and sports automatic. I haven't turned all the traction control off because when I do, I can't seem to activate launch control. So I'm in traction mode, which is essentially the old MDM. My Racebox Mini is down here and ready to go. My left foot is hard down on the brake. My right foot is on the accelerator. Launch control active. Here we go. Oh, tiny little pause, and then off we go. And there's 60 miles an hour. 4.41 seconds to 60 miles an hour. So you can add a tenth of that, 4.5. It's 3/10 quicker than BMW claim, which is no surprise. And I think that is definitely quick enough for your X5 hybrid. This car has been an absolute joy to live with, come rain or shine, and I'm really going to miss it when it goes back to BMW UK early tomorrow morning. I bang on about the state of our UK roads quite a lot on the channel, and for good reason. But you see, when you have the keys to an X5, which I've been lucky enough to have a couple of times this year, you almost forget about the state of the roads, and that's for 2 reasons. Number one, you have a really good commanding driving position, so you can look further down the road and hopefully spot that pothole. Number 2, because we're on massive 21-inch wheels with really wide rubber, and they seem to glide over the majority of potholes and not fall into them like they would in a normal car. So although I love my M3 and my M2 for that matter, I'm always going to miss the luxuries of cruising around in an X5, because it really does iron out the worst of surfaces and deal with everything very, very well. Let's talk about this car's hybrid running gear. We'll start by putting it in electric only. We've already talked about on the outside the fact that it has at least a 50-mile realistic tried and tested range, which is really, really impressive. That electric motor will give us 197 horsepower, and depending on where you look, either 280 newton meters or 450 newton meters. I couldn't get that clarified, but to me it feels like the latter. It feels like there's plenty of torque and there's definitely enough go to keep up with the everyday flow of traffic. It will also go on to a top speed of 87 miles an hour in electric only, which again is fast enough certainly for the UK and for places like France on their toll routes. And then if I hit this hybrid button, well, it gives me a combination of electrical energy and combustion engine. At the moment it's stayed in electric only because I'm using about 5 or 10% throttle, but if I apply more throttle, let's say 50%, then that wonderful B58 kicks into life and I now have combustion engine and electrical energy, and the car plays around with both of them, sometimes gives me the two together. There's a button down here, looks like a battery, and if I hit that, it gives me battery hold. So when I'm in hybrid, it will hold the current charge, which is 20 miles of electrical energy only range. So it should hold on to that regardless of how I drive. And then when I whack it into sport, I can feel the adaptive suspension stiffening up. The ride height drops by about 20 millimeters, as we'd already talked about. And the B58 is now constantly on, whether I give it a small throttle input or not. When I give it a big throttle input, well, I get the B58 and I get all of that electrical energy. So that maximum 483 horsepower and 700 newton meters of torque is available. If I pull this down here, I've got sports automatic, pull the paddles, and kind of feels like I'm driving a combustion only engine car, but with magic torque feel, especially down low. We'll leave it in third out of here at 30 miles an hour, put my foot down, and it pulls so hard out there. A lot of that does have to do with the wonderful B58 that does have incredible low down torque on its own, but a lot of that is that electrical energy that is there assisting that motor. So you've always got pickup, doesn't matter what gear. In fact, let's try 6th gear at 35 miles an hour. Put my foot on the floor and there's 40, 45, 50, 55, and there's the speed limit in 6th gear. I mean, that was pulling from well under 2,000 RPM. So you've got a really flexible powertrain, if you like, and it all works together really well. I'd say it's pretty much seamless. Only slow speed maneuvers going into drive and reverse. Sometimes it's a little bit slow to react compared to a combustion only X5, but I'm not talking about a massive night and day difference. I can just notice small little differences there, but otherwise it's a really, really useful system. And what I've noticed is if I do drive it in sport, then my electric range charges up. So when I left my house a couple of hours ago, it had, I think, 25 miles of electric range. By the time I'd got here, driving mostly in sports, that electric range had gone up to 30 miles. So you can recharge that battery, obviously using regen methods when you're braking off the throttle, going downhill. And when you're in sport, it seems to charge up really quickly. So you don't necessarily always have to plug this car in, but to get its most efficient way of working, then you would plug it in every night, because that's the only way you're going to achieve those ridiculous claimed MPG figures. Let's talk about ride and handling. I've knocked it back into hybrid, which gives us comfort suspension. And as we know, this particular car, the 50e, comes standard with BMW's air suspension, which is presumably the same system that was on that wonderful X5 30D I had about 3 months ago. I remember saying in that video that the ride quality of that car was sublime, one of the best ever. And although this isn't uncomfortable, it definitely feels different. And that's confusing because we have the same 21-inch wheels, we have the same tyres, but it must be calibrated and set up slightly different. This 50E does weigh an extra 200 kilos compared to the 30D, so maybe they've had to stiffen everything up to control that weight. And that also translates to handling. So now we'll put it into sport. Pull that for sports automatic. Pull paddle. As we know, it's very fast in a straight line. Really, really quick. It stays nice and flat through corners, but I can just feel that extra mass. And the ride again feels a little bit edgier, a little bit firmer, which you could argue is good and bad for handling. But as a whole, it definitely feels in hybrid or in sport like it's managing more weight and more mass, which it is. But you wouldn't think it was only 200 kilos. To me, it feels 350, 400 kilos heavier. It just doesn't deal with its weight as well as the 30D. And that's a little bit of a disappointment. It's still amazing when you consider how big and heavy this car is and all the technology, including the hybrid systems that it has beneath its skin. But it's not as engaging or fun to drive as the 30D, and you probably wouldn't expect a diesel to be more fun and engaging than an X5 with a B58 in it. But that extra weight definitely is noticeable and does slightly ruin the ride and slightly ruin the handling. But I am nitpicking here because that 30D was close to perfect in terms of ride quality, so I wasn't expecting it to be any better, but I was hoping that it would at least match it. What's my verdict? Well, if you're after a large, practical, luxury plug-in hybrid, look no further. This is as good as it gets. Certainly the best and most convincing hybrid that I've ever tried and tested. And that includes BMW's very own 550e, which I tried a few weeks ago. That's their new 5 Series with essentially the same running gear. To me, this is a better package, and they cost about the same. But if you don't need the hybrid running gear and electrical only energy, my money would still go on the brilliant 30D. It's about £8,000 less. It has a longer overall range of about 700 miles compared to this car's 500 miles. And although on paper it looks slower and maybe underpowered compared to this, in reality, that diesel lump is just magic. It has power and torque absolutely everywhere and makes light work of the X5. As you can probably tell, I'm still missing that wonderful 30D that I had earlier this year. Really is a car that ticks so many boxes.